Hello everyone, my name is Garrett, and today is a great day to learn something new.
So let's do that together. My name is Gabe, and you are watching
Studio Classroom. Hi friends, welcome back for the second day of our lesson titled Greenhouse Gas Reduction in Agriculture. Gabe, we started this off yesterday.
Yes, we did. And we started by talking about greenhouse gases and what they are. Of course, greenhouses have been around for a long time. But there are gases that are released into the environment by some of the activities that farmers do, and this is contributing to global warming, which is not a good thing.
No, it heats up the planet and makes everyone a little bit less safe. But how can farmers or people in agriculture change these practices? It's not so easy.
That's right, but that's something that we're going to talk a little bit about in our lesson today. So without further ado, let's get into our first reading.
Greenhouse gas reduction in agriculture. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions on farms. Farmers often need to use techniques that release greenhouse gases, but they can try to make them as effective as possible so they don't need to do them as often. For example, performing regular maintenance on farm equipment can ensure fuel efficiency, which saves expenses on fuel and results in reduced emissions. Some steps in the farming process are more effective at certain times than others. Farmers can calculate the optimal time to run machinery and only use it then.
All right, friends, we are talking all about greenhouse gases and what farmers could possibly do to, in small ways, reduce their contributions to global warming.
So this section is subtitled Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions on Farms. Well, let's take a look at that word emissions. This is gases or substances sent into the air. For example, car emissions contribute to air pollution.
Exactly. They sure do. Well, let's get into the section. We read, farmers often need to use techniques that release greenhouse gases, but they can try to make them as effective as possible so they don't need to do them as often.
You know, we talked a little bit about tractors yesterday, Garrett. I haven't done my research. I imagine there are some tractors that are run on electricity now instead of gas, maybe?
I think I have seen some news headlines about those, though I'm sure they're very expensive.
Yeah.
And of course, that battery technology is not easy to use.
Right. There's still quite a lot of advancements that need to be done. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But there are still some things we can do, and farmers are aware of this. We read here, for example, performing regular maintenance on farm equipment can ensure fuel efficiency. Let's take a look at that word, fuel. It's kind of like the word gas we used yesterday. Often we use gasoline and fuel to mean the same thing, but fuel basically is a material used to produce energy.
Right. Gasoline is one kind of fuel. Cars need fuel like gasoline or even electricity to run.
That's right. Well, we continue with this sentence, which saves expenses on fuel and results in reduced emissions. Well, it sounds like a win in at least two ways.
Exactly. And that term fuel efficiency is something you'll hear a lot if you're trying to buy a new car. These cars are trying to go the same distance or further on the same amount or even less fuel.
Yeah, we use a word mileage when talking about this, right? M-I-L-E-A-G-E. Even if you're in a country that operates on kilometers, we might still use the word mileage to talk about, what mileage does this car have? Can you go for a long ways with only a certain amount of gas? And we have kind of a fun term for a vehicle that takes a lot of gas and you can't go very far. It's called a gas guzzler. Guzzle is like to drink down something very quickly. So we kind of have that name to talk about these vehicles. Did you ever own a gas guzzler, Garrett?
The one car I had previously was maybe on the edge there. It did not have great fuel efficiency. Well, let's continue. We read some steps in the farming process are more effective at certain times than others.
That's right. So, farmers can calculate the optimal time to run machinery and only use it then. Okay, so they are making some efforts. Well, let's talk about the word calculate here. This is to find out a number by using math.
Right. We might need to calculate how much paint you need for the wall of that new house you just bought. Well, yes, they are calculating the right times to do certain things.
You know, if I calculated a little more with different things in life, I'm pretty sure I could save, maybe cut costs on certain things. When you're making a budget, friends, it's good to calculate and do the numbers ahead of time. That way you're not spending too much money. But let's talk about another word here. It is the word optimal. This is the best or most effective for a certain situation.
Like, for example, the doctor helped him find the optimal time to take his medicine. So the very best time to get the best results.
And there's one more word we'd like to talk about here. It has to do with machines. It is the word machinery. Okay, machines used to do work, especially in factories or farms.
Yes. For example, the factory stopped when the machinery broke down. Now, this last section here is very interesting. It sounds like by making some changes, farmers not only are helping the environment, they might be cutting costs too.
Exactly. I think that's the point. And I think that's something that farmers love to hear and think about. How can I help the environment but also not lose too much money in the process, right? Because as you said earlier, it is pretty competitive out there.
It sure is. Now, friends, let's get to our next reading.
Greenhouse gas reduction in agriculture. Farmers' choices about what crops to plant can also affect emissions. Between harvest and planting season, many farmers plant cover crops, plants that grow quickly and anchor the soil in place. This also prevents the carbon that is trapped in the soil from being released into the atmosphere. And planting legumes in a field every 5 years or so can also help, since these crops replenish the nitrogen in the soil. After the legumes are harvested, the same field can be used for other crops and will require less fertilizer, resulting in less nitrous oxide in the atmosphere.
Of course, using machines less on the farm will help reduce climate change. But what about the specific things that farmers plant in the ground?
Well, we are continuing to learn about farmers' choices here, and we read farmers' choices about what crops to plant also affect emissions. So they not only have to worry about tractors, they also have to worry about what specific plants they are planting. Between harvest and planting season, many farmers plant cover crops, plants that grow quickly and anchor the soil in place. So that's a cover crop.
Okay, let's talk about some of those things. First of all, to anchor. This means to hold something firmly in place, just like the anchor on a ship holds it there. Well, here these plants anchor the soil in place so it doesn't blow away.
Yeah, I often think about that thing on a ship. They throw over into the sea to anchor the ship in the sea. But of course, as you see in our lesson, this can be used as a verb. So they anchor in the soil, and we see this phrase in place. This means in the correct or proper position. For example, make sure your helmet is in place before riding the bike.
Yes, and here in place is the same place it was before. You don't want the soil to move. Well, we continue. This also prevents the carbon that is trapped in the soil from being released into the atmosphere.
Okay, so it sounds like a good thing so far, and planting legumes in a field every 5 years or so can also help, since these crops replenish the nitrogen in the soil. It's always interesting to me to learn about how plants can affect our environment. Like, I had no idea that this is what legumes can do.
Sure. And I love that word. It sounds kind of fun.
Yeah.
Legume or legume. Well, these are plants like beans and peas that grow in pods. Even peanuts are a kind of legume they're actually not a nut.
That's right. Peanuts. They're legumes. Say that again, friend. Legumes. Good. Okay, so let's go on to the next phrase we want to talk about. And this is a phrase we could use in writing or in speaking, and it's very simple, or so. You see that here, 5 years or so. This is about or around a certain number. If you don't want to be exact, you can use or so.
For example, we waited 10 minutes or so before the movie started. We often use that phrase when we're not totally sure about the exact number.
All right, well, we want to talk about another very important crop-related word here, not only related to crops, but also about a lot of other things in life, and that is the word replenish. This is to refill or restore something.
Yes, you might say we need to drink water after exercising to replenish the fluids in our bodies.
So, legumes will help replenish the nitrogen in the soil. This is very important. I wonder how farmers discovered these things. But we continue here. After the legumes are harvested, the same field can be used for other crops and will require less fertilizer, resulting in less nitrous oxide in the atmosphere. So it sounds like farmers are all about reutilizing things as well.
And this is great. I know that in most agriculture, that nitrogen in the soil comes from the same stuff as gasoline. So that's not great for the planet or the soil.
That's right. Friends, you see the phrase resulting in here in this sentence as well. This is kind of like that phrase we talked about earlier or yesterday, to lead to something, right? So if something happens, it results in something else.
All right, friends, we're not quite done yet, but now it is time for us to go and watch our info cloud.
Greenhouse gas reduction in agriculture. Stopping farming altogether is not an option, but the strategic use of resources can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases released in this necessary process.
So there are all these bad things that come out from farming. Does that mean we should just stop?
Garrett, no. In fact, I have thought about this question before, like, would I ever want to live on a farm? Could I ever live on a farm? Could I ever maybe even start my own farm? Because it may come to that in the future. Do you think that you could live on a farm?
I don't know that I'd ever want to, not at least on a big farm, but it would be fun to live on a bit of a bigger property where I grow some of the things that I eat.
Yeah, the reason I mention that is because it's good to have those skills. We have to go to a supermarket to get the fruits and vegetables that we need, but if we knew how to grow those things ourselves, then maybe in the future when things got kind of scary, perhaps, then at least we would know how to grow those things.
Right, life is so convenient these days. We all need things to eat. Those things often come from farms, but not too many of us have to actually live or work there. We do know, though, as we see in our article, stopping farming altogether is not an option.
That's right. It's not an option. That's a great phrase for you to know. That means it's not possible or allowed. You shouldn't even think about it if it's not an option.
Like when you're a student, you should have this thought in your mind. Skipping school is not an option.
That's right. So we can't stop farming altogether, of course, and I don't think many of us would want that to happen anyway. But the strategic use of resources can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases that are released into the atmosphere. Well, let's take a look at this word resource, because this is a useful material or supply, like water, time, or money. We have so many resources that we use all around us.
Yeah, the things you have available in order to accomplish tasks or other things. For example, we should use natural resources wisely if we want to protect the earth.
Yeah, there are different kinds of resources out there, right? There are renewable resources. Those are resources that can be renewed and used in different ways. And of course, there are resources that may be a little bit worse for the environment.
Right. Well, we have learned throughout these 2 days that with the use of new techniques and maybe even new technology, some of these climate change problems can be addressed or lessened over time.
Well, friends, we have one more question we'd like to talk about with you later, but right now let's go to today's fun fact. Friends, we have reached the end of our lesson today. It has been a very insightful one for me. As I mentioned at the beginning of yesterday's lesson, when I think of farming, I usually think of cattle. But of course, a lot of farmers work with crops as well. And some of the techniques or things that they're doing might actually be bad for the environment. But let's go to our talk about it question. Which of these techniques that are mentioned in our lesson sounds most helpful? Do you know of others that should be considered? Garrett?
Well, one of the things we talked about today is farmers planting different things in the same soil at different times of the year. Now, this is an ancient technique, often called crop rotation. Today, in order to save money, the same farmer might plant the same thing all year round, but that's not what's best for the soil.
Well, Garrett, do you know what technique is my favorite that we learned from our lesson?
What is that?
The one about planting legumes in the soil.
Yes.
To help replenish the nitrogen in the soil. Friends, what do you think? How would you answer that question? That is all the time that we have for today. My name is Gabe.
And my name is Garrett. Of course, we'll see you again next time right here on Studio Classroom.